stuff. They are not having it. It's the COVID zero tolerance thing that they've been going through forever. And there was a fire recently, and these people died. And part of the reason why they died was they couldn't get help because of all of these zero COVID policies.
High.
Let me see. Did they talk about it in this one?
Protests have erupted in
I think they do. Let me see.
Beijing and Shanghai, in Wuhan and Guangzhou and other Chinese cities over China's strict zero COVID policies. The protests were triggered by a deadly fire Thursday at an apartment building in Urumqi, the capital of the far western province Xinjiang. There are reports that local COVID-19 protocols prevented firefighters from reaching residents trapped in the burning building, resulting in the deaths of at least 10 people, including children. On Friday, crowds took to the streets in Urumqi. Protests then spread to other large cities and campuses, including Tsinghua University in Beijing, where Chinese leader Xi Jinping studied. Many of the protesters held up blank pieces of white paper. One man in Beijing told Reuters, "The white paper represents everything we want to say but cannot say." Protesters say police in Shanghai have begun detaining people who took part in the demonstrations.
In Shanghai, a lot of people have already been detained, not only last night. They did it for everybody, for all the people, for the delivery guys not to be locked in their apartments, for everybody to be able to receive medicines and food. We need to help these people, free those people in Shanghai.
On Sunday, police in Shanghai arrested BBC reporter Ed Lawrence while he was covering a protest. He was held for hours. The BBC says he was beaten and kicked by police officers. The protests in China mark an unprecedented challenge to Xi Jinping's zero COVID policies, which has resulted in extended strict lockdowns across China. Last week, hundreds of workers at the world's largest iPhone factory clashed with Chinese police over COVID restrictions, which have forced many workers to live at the Foxconn factory. Videos posted on social media show workers being tear gassed and beaten outside the plant. Earlier today, China announced it would ease some COVID restrictions, but affirmed its zero COVID strategy. The protests come as COVID cases are at a record high in China. There were just over 40,000 new infections reported Sunday, a new single-day high. Throughout the pandemic, China has reported far fewer COVID cases and deaths than the United States and other nations. The United States is currently recording an average of 42,000 cases a day. Since the start of the pandemic, the U.S. has recorded nearly 1.1 million COVID deaths. China's official COVID death toll is just over 5,000. Last week, China recorded its first COVID death in 6 months. To talk more about the protests in China, we're joined by Eli Friedman. He's an associate professor and chair of international and comparative labor at Cornell University. He's the author of The Urbanization of People, The Politics of Development, Labor Markets, and Schooling in the Chinese City. He's also co-editor of the new book, The China Question, Toward Left Perspectives. His recent article for the Asian Labor Review is titled Foxconn's Great Escape. Professor Friedman, thanks so much for being with us. Let's start off by talking about this uprising over the last few days in Beijing, in the financial capital, Shanghai, in Urumqi and other places, the significance of this.
Well, thanks for having me, Amy. This is unbelievably significant for a number of reasons. It is the largest protest movement that Xi Jinping has faced in the 10 years since he came to power. There was a protest that was probably larger in scale in 2012, just before he came to power, which was an anti-Japanese protest over some disputed islands. But we haven't seen anything like this. And there's a couple of things that are really significant about it. The first is that it's nationwide. So as we've just heard, these protests are appearing in cities across the country, from the far west to the more populous East Coast. And that's extremely unusual in China. We see localized small-scale protests, but this nationwide scale is really unprecedented. The other thing that I think is really important and maybe of greater concern to the authorities is the fact that it has incorporated a really diverse group of people. We see a cross-class alliance. You've mentioned the workers, the students at Tsinghua, the most university, students at Peking University. We see middle-class people in Shanghai. It's also a cross-ethnic movement, and I think that hasn't necessarily been fully appreciated. The fact that this is a response to a fire that happened in Urumqi is incredibly important, given the background of repression, surveillance, of mass incarceration that has happened to Muslim minorities there, and so this is really one of the first time that we've seen this kind of cross-ethnic form of mobilization, and so for all of these reasons, it does present a really big challenge.
Interesting. Xi Jinping been making moves lately, a lot of stuff, but this might get him. Let me read the caption. It says, unprecedented protests have erupted in multiple Chinese cities over Xi Jinping's strict zero COVID policies, which have resulted in extended strict lockdowns across the country. The protests were triggered by a deadly fire Thursday at an apartment building in Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang, where local COVID restrictions reportedly prevented firefighters from reaching the trapped residents. This comes as hundreds of workers at the world's largest iPhone factory, Foxconn, clashed last week with police over restrictions that have forced many workers to live at the factory. Live at the factory. They're like, okay, it's COVID, zero COVID, so y'all can't move around. Y'all might as well just stay here and work. Wow. Let me finish reading this. It says, China now for 3 years have seen a level of lockdown that is simply inconceivable, says Cornell labor scholar Eli Friedman, who calls the cross-class, cross-ethnic protests as a movement against surveillance. Friedman says, although China enforces the country's COVID restrictions, top U.S. corporations like Apple and Tesla are implicated in upholding the closed-loop management systems at Foxconn and other Chinese manufacturers. So that's what y'all have to understand. And then, so these U.S. corporations have a hand in this stuff. And that's the reason why they always move their production overseas, is because they can get away with this kind of bullshit what they wouldn't be able to get away with over here. Let me read some comments underneath the video. It says, Apple needs to be held accountable for the working conditions that they are allowing in China. Apple must speak up now or they are complicit. Another comment, it says, they do so well with masking in general, so I understand their frustration. That's too long. People over here threatened cashiers, teachers, and yelled at students after a much shorter time. So I commend them for standing together and not against each other. I pray conditions get better. It's really uplifting and to me when they talk about it being cross-ethnic, and they keep us over here in the States fighting with each other in these little groups that we label ourselves in. And meanwhile, it's only the few. It's the oligarchy, that's the corporations that's winning, at the end of the day. So we are getting screwed. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, gay, straight, a man, a woman, young, old, all of us getting screwed. If you're not in that owner class that's, absolutely, oligarchy, if you wasn't born with trust funds and stuff, you're not these people. Okay, so it's the majority of us, and we just need to get together. And they won't be able. They can't control us. They really can't. The way they have done it is by us fighting with each other. That's where we're putting all our energy at. The day we stop looking at race and all of that stuff, like which state you're from or something, or gender, whatever the hell, which religion you have. If you're a Republican or a Democrat, if we stop the day we stop looking at that so heavily is the day it's game over for them. Let me read another comment. It says, people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. That's exactly what that's the point I was trying to make. Another comment says, power to the people. Another comment, go Chinese people. Awesome, they are fighting for their rights. Another comment, hope he's right and the younger Han Chinese will recognize this has been going on all around them for quite some time. And I hope all the cryberries who whined about tyranny and oppression when they couldn't go to the gym or the mall will recognize the real thing when they see it. So, yeah. So, and that's another thing, how like over here in the States is China, 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 like it's China's fault for this and China's fault for that. And the thing is that I really, and then when it's just the same thing when they talk about Russia, Russia did this, Russia that. What you really need to try to understand is that their government is not their people. The government of China and what they do is not necessarily by the consent of the majority of the people that live there, the actual Chinese people. Same thing with Russia. You think that all the people in Russia agree with what Putin does? Like, so we can't demonize these whole people based on the actions of their government, because that's what they do to us here in the States. You know, our government does this and that around the world. Do we all agree with that? Do you even agree with your senator? You know, do you agree with your governor? You know, the House representative person that represents your district, do you agree with them? Do they make decisions that you would have made or that you agree on? Did they check with you before they made these decisions? So think about that. Don't put all these people in this boat and think that they are all evil because they're from a certain country. And their country is doing horrible stuff. Their government is. You have to separate the people from the government. Because who's suffering? Just like in Ukraine, who's suffering in Ukraine? It's the people of Ukraine who's suffering. We're over here like, oh yeah, you know, we're worried about the money that's being sent, and I don't agree with that. But what I'm saying is, like, the war continues. The war goes on. We're prolonging the war. Meanwhile, more Ukrainians die. Meanwhile, Russia is blowing up the infrastructures for them. They're cold. It's the wintertime. The people are the ones that suffer as a result of the government's decisions. And do you think that all the people in Ukraine agree with these people, the war and all of this stuff?